I got home 2 days early from the pipeline inspection outside Amarillo, and the first thing I noticed was that my daughter's bedroom light was on at 1 in the morning, and every other window in the house was dark. My granddaughter was standing at the kitchen counter, ironing a school uniform with her hands shaking so badly the iron kept skipping. I said her name and she jumped like I'd fired a gun. When she turned around, I saw the bruise along her jaw before she could pull her hair over it. But nothing prepared me for what I found taped behind the water heater in that basement the next afternoon. If you've made it here tonight, I'm glad for the company. This story carries some fictional elements, shaped for meaning, not for any one family. But what it has to say, I think you need to hear it same as I did. Tell me, friend, where are you tuning in from tonight? I like knowing who's sitting with me on nights like this. March the 3rd, 2024, 11 at night on a Sunday, and I'd been on the road 8 days straight, contract work inspecting compressor stations from Midland up through the Panhandle. I turned onto Hollis Street the way I'd turned onto it for 11 years, since my daughter Renee and her husband bought that little brick ranch with the wraparound porch, and something about the shape of the dark stopped me before I'd even cut the engine. A house with people sleeping in it has a certain kind of dark, soft around the edges. A porch light somebody forgot. A blue flicker behind a curtain where the television's still going. This wasn't that. This was a house holding its breath. I sat in the truck with the engine ticking as it cooled, the way you do after driving too many hours to trust your own legs right away. 42 years I drove pipeline inspection before I retired, went back to consulting because sitting still never suited me, and 42 years teaches a man to read what doesn't add up. A weld that looks fine until you run the gauge over it. A gauge reading that's technically within spec but wrong in a way you can't put a number on yet. A house that's dark when a 9-year-old should have a nightlight on down the hall. I got out, walked around back because the front door sticks in the cold, and that's when I saw the kitchen window lit up yellow against the dark siding, and heard the low hum of the iron's motor. Katie was standing at the counter in her school uniform blouse, already dressed for Monday, though it was still Sunday night, running the iron over the collar with a concentration that didn't belong on a 9-year-old's face. She heard the storm door, and spun so fast the iron nearly went off the edge of the board. When she saw it was me, her whole body did something I'll be describing for the rest of my life. Relief first, quick and bright, and then right behind it, before the relief had even settled, fear. Pop, pop. Her voice came out thin. You're not supposed to be back till Tuesday. Job finished early, I said. Baby, why are you ironing your school clothes at 11 o'clock at night? She looked down at the collar like the answer was written on it. Miss Carroll says I have to have everything ready the night before, wrinkle-free. She checks. Where's your mama? Where's Danny? Danny was her stepfather, married Renee 2 years back, decent-seeming man who coached rec league baseball and shook my hand too hard the first time we met, the way men do when they're trying to prove something to a father-in-law. They went to the lake house, with Miss Carroll and Uncle Roy. Katie set the iron down carefully, upright on its heel. The way you'd set down something you'd been taught could burn you. They left Friday. And left you here alone? She didn't answer that. She picked the iron back up, ran it over a sleeve that didn't need it anymore, and that's when the light caught her jaw wrong, and I saw the bruise she'd been keeping angled away from me. Yellow-green at the edges, days old, the kind of bruise that had already tried to heal itself twice over. I want to tell you I did something useful in that moment. I didn't. I stood there in my own daughter's kitchen, with 42 years of reading gauges and welds, and not one single instinct telling me what to do with the fact that my granddaughter was standing in an empty house at midnight with a mark on her face she didn't want me to see. This story contains fictional elements crafted around a real kind of hurt, not any one real family. Names and towns are made up. What they carry, I don't think is made up at all. I should tell you about Renee first, because you can't understand how a man misses what's happening in his own family without understanding what came before it. And I've had a long time now to sit with all of it. My wife Corinne and I had Renee late, after 2 miscarriages that took something out of both of us we never fully got back. Corinne used to say Renee was the only good argument she'd ever lost, because Corinne had wanted to stop trying after the second loss, and I'd asked for one more, and Renee came 11 months later, stubborn from the very start, born 3 weeks early because she apparently couldn't wait to see what all the fuss was about. I drove pipeline work back then too. 4 days out, 3 days home, and Corinne ran that house the way some women run a small country. She kept the books. She kept Renee's shot record and her school forms and the calendar of who was picking up who from what practice. And every single time I came home off a rotation, there was a plate covered in foil on the stove and a girl who'd run to the door before I'd finished parking. Renee was 7 when she asked her mother why she called me her partner instead of what other daddies were called. Because we're a team, baby. Corinne told her. I heard this story 100 times over the years. Corinne loved telling it. Daddy drives the pipeline. You and me hold the house down. That's the job while he's gone. You understand? Renee nodded like she was signing a contract. 7 years old, dead serious about it. I want you to hold on to that, because that's the last piece of family I had that felt whole and uncomplicated, and I didn't know it at the time. Nobody ever tells you which Tuesday is the last easy one. Corinne found the lump herself, in the shower, during a summer when Renee was 16 and about to get her license. I was 3 states away outside Casper, Wyoming when she called, and her voice had that particular steadiness in it that I'd learned over 20 years meant she was holding something back specifically, so I wouldn't do something reckless like drive through the night on no sleep. I drove through the night anyway. Some things you don't get to be talked out of. Ovarian. Stage 3 by the time they caught it. Because ovarian cancer doesn't announce itself the way some cancers do. It just sits quiet until it's not quiet anymore. Corinne fought it the way she did everything, with a checklist and a calendar and a refusal to let the diagnosis make decisions for her that she hadn't approved first. I quit the road for 18 months, took what savings we had and made up the rest later. I do not regret 1 mile of income I lost sitting in that recliner beside her hospital bed. She lasted 2 years and 4 months, longer than the first doctor predicted, and shorter than the second one hoped for. And in the last week, when she knew, she asked me to help her sit up in bed one afternoon, and she had me open the drawer in her nightstand, and inside was her mother's locket, gold, worn thin at the clasp from 3 generations of women, opening and closing it. For Renee, she said, when she's steady enough to wear it and mean it, you'll know when that is. I will, I told her, and my voice wasn't worth much in that moment. Tell her, Corinne said, and she took a long time choosing the words, the way she'd taken a long time choosing every word for 2 years and 4 months. Tell her that love isn't the loud kind. It's the kind that shows up and irons the collar and doesn't say a word about how tired it is. She died on a Thursday in October, gray morning light through the blinds, Renee holding one hand and me holding the other, and Renee was 16, and she did not make a sound the whole time, and I have never in my life been prouder of anyone, and never in my life wished harder that I didn't have a reason to be. I put that locket in a small cedar box in my dresser, and I did not take it out again for 11 years, because Renee wasn't steady, not for a long time, and a father learns to recognize the difference between a daughter who's healing and a daughter who's just gotten good at performing healed. Renee married young, at 22, a man named Chuck, who turned out to drink more than he worked, and that marriage lasted 6 years, and gave her Katie, and gave her a divorce, and gave her, I think, a fear of being alone that never fully left her system even after Chuck was long gone. She raised Katie herself for 3 years, worked 2 jobs, and every time I offered money she'd tell me she had it handled. Same words her mother used to use, and it took me a long while to understand that in my family, "I've got it handled" was a phrase that meant exactly the opposite. She met Danny Pruitt at Katie's kindergarten fall festival, both of them there for kids from different marriages. Danny's boy Roy from a first marriage that ended, by his account, because his ex-wife was, in his words, not built for family. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say about the mother of your own child, but Danny had a good handshake and a good job managing a feed store, and he coached Roy's baseball team, and Renee had been alone a long time, and a father can talk himself into a great deal when his daughter's eyes light up the way Renee's did around Danny. They married 18 months later. Danny moved into Renee's house on Hollis Street with Roy, who was 11 then, 2 years older than Katie, and about 8 months after the wedding, Danny's mother Carol got put out of her apartment in Lubbock, some dispute with a landlord Danny never explained clearly, and she moved in temporary. And her brother Roy, I need to stop here, because there's a second Roy in this story and it confused me too at the time. Danny's boy was named Roy Jr., after Danny's brother, Roy Sr., who showed up at the house not 2 months after Carol did. Between what he called jobs, and stayed in the spare room off the garage. So by the fall of that year, there were 6 people living in a house built for 4, and I was 3 states away most weeks, checking on my daughter over the phone the way I'd checked on her mother over the phone for 20 years, hearing "We're fine, Daddy, don't worry," and believing it, because I wanted to, and because a man on the road learns to trust the voice on the other end of the line more than he trusts his own gut, since the gut's just guessing, and the voice is supposed to know. What I didn't know, what I only learned later, piece by piece, the way you reconstruct a bad weld from the failure pattern instead of watching it happen, was that Katie had stopped being a granddaughter in that house and started being staff. Carol handled what she called standards. Every morning she'd walk the house before anyone else was up and find something Katie had missed the night before. A baseboard that wasn't dusted, a dish towel folded wrong. She'd make Katie redo it while she stood there watching, narrating the whole time to nobody in particular, the way you'd talk about a machine that wasn't running right. "This one doesn't listen the first time, has to be shown twice, every time." Katie standing 3 feet away the whole while she said it. Roy Sr. handled money and errands and, it turned out later, a great deal more than that. But the piece that touched Katie directly was smaller and meaner in its own way, he'd tell her, easy and unhurried like he was doing her a favor, that her mother had picked Danny's family over her own, that Renee was too busy being a new wife to notice much of anything about her own daughter anymore. And wasn't that something to think about? And Roy Jr., 11 years old, going on something much older, ran the daily operation the way a kid runs a game. He's figured out the rules to better than anyone supervising him. He'd wait at the front window for my truck or Renee's car, and the second it turned onto Hollis Street, he'd call out through the house, and everyone would reset. Katie's dinner would go from the floor, by the back door. That's where she ate, most nights. Off a paper plate on the linoleum, up onto the table. The television would switch to something appropriate. By the time the front door opened, it looked like a house where a 9-year-old was loved and looked after, because it had 4 minutes of rehearsal built into the system every single time. I asked Renee, every phone call, how Katie was doing. "She's good, Daddy, adjusting well. You know how blended families are, takes time." I believed every word of it every single time, because it's easier to believe your daughter is telling you the truth than to sit with the alternative from 400 miles away with nothing you can do about it tonight. There was a Tuesday in January, cold snap across the whole panhandle, when my phone rang at a truck stop outside Lubbock, a video attached, 12 seconds, Katie shoving Roy Jr. on the back patio, him stumbling into a lawn chair, going down holding his arm like it was broken, though it wasn't, I'd learn later. Renee's voice on the call after was tight, controlled, a voice managing something. "This isn't like her, Daddy. I don't know what's gotten into her." Then Katie's voice, small and flat. "Hey, Pop. I asked her straight out if she'd pushed him." Long pause, longer than a 9-year-old should need to answer a simple question. "Yeah," she said. "I did. I told her that wasn't how we raised people in this family." I heard myself say it, and I've hated the sound of my own voice in that memory every day since. Because what I did not ask, not once, was what happened in the 30 seconds before that camera started rolling. I did not ask, because Danny's family had already spent 8 months teaching me, in small increments, too gentle to notice, that Katie was the variable in that house that needed managing, and I'd absorbed the lesson without ever once catching myself learning it. That's the shame of this story. Not that I was gone. A man has to work. It's that I was gone, and I let people I barely knew narrate my own granddaughter to me, and I nodded along like I was reading a road sign in a language I only half understood, and the whole time she was standing 3 feet from a woman calling her "this one" and eating dinner off the kitchen floor. I found out the rest, the way you find out most things in this life. Too late to prevent it, and just in time to do something about it. That Sunday night in the kitchen, I didn't push Katie for answers. Not yet. I got her to bed, her real bed, first time in longer than I want to know, because it turned out most nights she'd been sleeping on a cot in the laundry room, so Roy Sr. could have her room for what he called his office, and I sat up in the kitchen till 4 in the morning with a legal pad the way I used to sit up documenting weld failures, writing down every single thing that didn't add up. The bruise, the cot in the laundry room, Katie flinching at the storm door, the way she'd said Miss Carol checks about her school uniform like Carol was a supervisor and not a house guest. Renee and Danny got back Monday evening, sunburned, and relaxed from the lake. And I watched my daughter's face when she saw me in her kitchen. Watched the surprise curdle fast into something guarded, the particular look of a person who's been managing a story for a long time, and just watched an outsider walk into the middle of it. "Daddy, you said Tuesday. Where's Katie been sleeping, Renee?" I watched her look for the lie and not quite find it fast enough. That told me everything the bruise hadn't already. It took 3 more weeks to get the whole shape of it. Katie telling me pieces at a time, the way you carefully take apart something that's been wound too tight for too long. Carol's inspections. Roy Sr.'s steady campaign to make an 11-year-old the household's designated victim so nobody looked too hard at him. And Roy Jr.'s 4-minute warning system, which Katie described to me with a flatness in her voice that told me she'd stopped being surprised by any of it a long time before I ever pulled into that driveway. What none of us knew yet, what I found taped behind the water heater in that basement 2 days later, going down to check a pilot light that had been acting up, was a manila envelope with 6 months of documents inside it. Convenience account applications with Renee's forged signature. A reverse mortgage inquiry on the Hollis Street house, in Renee and Danny's names, initiated and half completed without either of them knowing it existed. A separate folder with photocopies of Corinne's old estate documents, the ones naming Renee as beneficiary of a small trust her mother had set up before she died. Documents Roy Sr. had no earthly reason to possess, unless he'd gone looking through my daughter's filing cabinet for exactly this purpose. I called Renee down to that basement and set the envelope on top of the water heater between us and watched 28 years of trusting the wrong, quiet things in her own home fall out of my daughter's face all at once. "He's been asking me to sign things," she said, so soft I almost lost it under the furnace noise. "For Danny's business," I thought. She stopped. "I didn't read them close enough, Daddy. I trusted him." "I know, baby. What do I do?" "You call a lawyer in the morning," I said. "Tonight, you help me get your daughter's things packed, and both of you are staying with me till this is sorted." It took federal investigators 4 months to work through it once Renee and Danny brought in a lawyer named Priscilla Whitfield out of Amarillo, a woman with the patience of a surgeon and the temper of a woman who'd clearly seen this particular kind of family operation before and hated it every time. Roy Sr., it turned out, had run the same play twice before in 2 other households, under a different last name each time, always the same pattern: insert himself into a blended family through a relative, establish trust slowly, isolate the most powerless person in the house to absorb blame and suspicion, and quietly bleed the family's paperwork for 18 to 24 months before something forced an exit. Carol wasn't his mother at all. She was a longtime associate, and the eviction that got her into Renee's house had never happened. There was no landlord dispute, no apartment in Lubbock, just a script they'd run together 3 times that anyone had found. Roy Jr. was 11. And I want to be as honest about him as I can, because it would be easy to hate an 11-year-old, and I've worked hard not to. Priscilla told us, gently, that in her experience, kids raised inside an operation like that one learn the whole language of it before they're old enough to know they had a choice not to. I don't know what happened to Roy Jr. He went to live with an aunt in Lubbock nobody in our family had ever met. I think about him more than I expected to. Danny, for his part, hadn't known the extent of it. He'd known his father drank too much and asked for money sometimes. He had not known about the forged signatures or the reverse mortgage inquiry, but he'd known enough about how Katie was being treated in that house, day after day, and said nothing, and chose comfort over his own stepdaughter's well-being more times than either he or Renee could count once they started counting. Their marriage didn't survive what came out. I won't pretend I was sorry about that. Roy Sr. stood trial in 2 states that year: financial exploitation of a family member, forgery, identity theft, and in Oklahoma, where his second scheme had been run 4 years earlier, an additional conviction for the same pattern against a widow named Alma Reyes, who I never met but whose name I think about, because Priscilla told us Alma had died 2 years after her ordeal, without ever recovering the money he'd taken from her. At sentencing, the judge in Amarillo told Roy Sr., looking at him over the bench, that a man who spends his life finding families with a soft spot and pressing on it until it breaks is a particular kind of thief, the kind the law doesn't have a strong enough word for. 14 years. Carol took a plea in exchange for testimony and got 18 months and 5 years probation. It wasn't enough, by my measure. for what those months cost my granddaughter. It was what the law had to offer, and I've made my peace with that being different from what I'd have handed down myself, standing in that basement, with that envelope in my hands. We repainted Katie's room that spring, the real bedroom, absorbed that had been Roy Sr.'s office. She picked a soft yellow, the color of the porch light Corinne always used to leave on for me, though Katie never knew that and I never told her. Some things you just let live quietly in your own chest. She stood in the doorway with a paint rag in her hands on the second day and said, "Pop, do you think Grandma Corinne would have liked this color?" "She'd have picked it herself," I told her, and my voice went someplace rough, and I let it. By that summer, Katie was back at her old lunch table, laughing at things 9-year-olds laugh at, sleeping in her own bed every single night, and Renee had moved them both into a smaller place 2 streets over, closer to me, close enough that I could get there in 4 minutes instead of 4 hours if a light ever went on at the wrong time of night again. Katie's 10th birthday landed on a Saturday in June. I'd been carrying that locket in my shirt pocket for 3 weeks by then, waiting the way I understood now that waiting is its own kind of readiness. You don't always get a sign. Sometimes you just have to trust that you'll know the day when it lands in front of you. I got up before dawn and made scrambled eggs with cheddar and green onion, the way Corinne used to make them on birthday mornings, filled the house with that smell before anyone else was awake to ask why. Renee came down first, saw what I was doing, and had to sit at the counter with her coffee for a minute before she trusted her own voice. Katie came downstairs in her pajamas, hair every direction, and stopped in the kitchen doorway looking at the eggs and the birthday balloon Renee had tied to her chair the night before. "Is this a big deal breakfast?" she asked. "It's a big deal breakfast," I told her. After the eggs, after Renee had cleared the plates, I asked Katie to sit with me a minute at the table. I reached into my shirt pocket, the pocket over my heart, where I'd carried that locket every single day since I decided the day had come, and I set it on the table between us. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," I said. "And then it belonged to my Corinne, your grandma, who you never got to meet, though I promise you she'd have loved you louder than anybody. She wanted your mama to have it, when your mama was steady enough to wear it and mean it. And your mama's asked me to give it to you instead, this year, because she says you're the steadiest one of the 2 of them right now. And I think she's right." Katie's hands went still on the table the way a person's hands go still around something they've been waiting for without knowing it. She picked up the locket, found the clasp with her fingers the way fingers find things they've been looking for, and opened it. And inside was a photograph of Corinne, at 19 before I ever knew her, laughing at something outside the frame. "She's pretty," Katie said, very quiet. "She was," I said. "She'd have loved that yellow you picked for your room. I mean that." Katie pressed the locket against her chest and cried the way a person cries when something's been held in long after holding it made any sense at all, her whole small body shaking with it, and I got up and came around the table and put my hand on her back and left it there and didn't say another word, because some moments don't need narrating, they just need somebody steady standing next to them. "I'm going to wear it every day," she said finally, wiping her face with both palms, fast and rough. Her mother's exact gesture, I noticed, the practical refusal to let tears get the last word. "Not every day," I told her. "Some days just carry it in your pocket instead. On the days that count the most, you wear it where people can see." She thought about that with the seriousness only a 10-year-old can bring to a piece of advice like that. "That's exactly right," she said, like she was the one handing down the wisdom now. And maybe, in a way, she was. Later that afternoon, I had to move my truck out from behind Renee's car in the driveway. I got in, checked the mirrors out of 42 years of habit, and looked back at the porch. Katie was sitting on the top step in the June sun, locket at her collar, watching me. She raised one hand, slow, unhurried, the exact gesture Corinne used to make from that same kind of porch for 20 years of goodbyes, and I don't know if Katie ever picked that gesture up from watching her own mother, who must have gotten it from watching hers, or if some things just move through a family whether anybody teaches them on purpose or not. I turned the engine off, got back out, walked up the driveway. Katie watched me come. "Forget something, Pop. "I did," I said. "I forgot I don't have anywhere I need to be right now." She scooted over to make room on the step. I sat down next to her. The light came through the pecan tree in Renee's new yard, the way June light does in the Texas Panhandle. Gold and unhurried, the kind that doesn't apologize for being exactly what it is. Neither one of us said anything for a good while. Neither one of us needed to. I'm just a man who spent 42 years reading gauges on a pipeline, checking for the one weld that doesn't hold, and I nearly missed the most important failure of my life happening inside my own family, because I was 3 states away and trusted the voice on the phone over the thing sitting quiet in my chest that kept telling me something was wrong. If this whole business has taught me anything, it's that quiet is not the same as fine. I stayed quiet too long myself, not because I loved my granddaughter any less, but because I was scared of what I'd have to do once I let myself see it plainly. Don't be like I was. Don't wait on a midnight ironing board to tell you what your gut's been trying to tell you for months. Watch the kid who eats standing up. Watch the kid who says, "I've got it handled," in a voice that means the exact opposite. I'm not a perfect grandfather, friend, not even close. But I came home 2 days early, and it turned out those 2 days mattered more than anything else I've done in my whole life. I believe, and I don't say this lightly, that something put me on that road early that week for a reason I'll never fully understand and don't need to. If Katie's story sat with you tonight the way it sat with me these past 2 years, tell me down in the comments. Tell me if you've lived something close to it, or seen it happen to somebody you love and didn't know what to do about it either. Somebody watching tonight needs to read exactly that. Share this with the person in your life who needs to hear it. And if these stories mean something to you, stay close, because there's more where this one came from. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It means more than I know how to say out loud. These stories carry fictional elements built for meaning, not for any one real family. If that's not the kind of thing that speaks to you, no hard feelings at all, friend. Go find what feeds your soul tonight.